that it seems to me that there's a broader group of people that would want to see Mr. not Mark, Jeffrey Epstein off in prison. And the way this has happened with regard to everything that we have talked about in the past, Mark, I think this kind of is a way to try to take away from trying to find out what happened to your brother. I mean, that's my view.
Yeah, because we get stymied. We can't get any answers about Jeffrey's, what happened to him. We were trying to find additional video footage, which they were telling me doesn't exist. And now they release video footage. We're trying to get the PCR report, which the report the fire department EMTs fill out on every case. And that's gone missing in the fire department's computer system. I haven't been able to get the medical records from the hospital. It's just that if this was just purely a suicide, why is this being so difficult? Why are they hiding all of this information?
Yeah, and I asked and I put out those questions when you were on last time, the questions that you have that have not been answered, which are really good questions. And then we saw that stupid video that they released. To me, that if anything, supports the fact that your brother was offed.
Exactly. There's nothing to show that he committed suicide. And the most important point is that when they did the autopsy the day after his death, both pathologists, Dr. Bodden and Kristen Roman, came out of the autopsy saying it looked too much like a homicide to call it a suicide. And then you get everybody else, like the chief medical examiner, Barbara Sampson, saying it's a suicide without any explanation really of why. And again, I have to point out, she never saw the body. So how can she determine it was a suicide when the two highly qualified pathologists that did the autopsy said they wouldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide? And then you get Kash Patel saying, it was suicide when you see one. So I question, how many suicides has he seen?
Dr. Patel.
It's just stupidity going on here.
Yeah. So, Mark, since we last spoke, and since this big dump of amazing footage and non-information came out, have you ramped up your efforts? Have you seen any progress of any kind, any responses, any different than you had before?
Well, more and more people are contacting me because they're concerned about this too. It's not just because of my brother, but an American citizen was killed in a prison under federal protection. And then, if it's, the fact also that this was never investigated as a potential homicide, because by calling it a suicide, it shuts down any investigation. There's lots of things they should have done if they were investigating it as a homicide. And more people are realizing that, and they're contacting me and they're questioning me, as you are.
Doesn't it seem? Let me ask both Mark and Doug this. Doesn't it seem that this going after Maxwell in this amount, this hard amount, right? We now have a subpoena for to appear before the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform that her attorney has answered, which obviously she cannot testify before unless she has immunity and all. There's a letter about that we don't have to go through completely. We have the petition of the government to release some government transcripts that was denied in Florida. Their briefs were due in the Southern District today, but they're not going to release everything. But the fact that they're trying to get her in some way to say something, it sounds to me that something has to be for somebody's self-protection and also to try to stymie Mark more. Doug, let me put that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. The government, it's not in the interest of this administration for more information to come out regarding Jeffrey Epstein and who he may have been involved with. It just isn't. It's just obvious that it is not. There's too much involvement of the current president with Mr. Epstein back in the day. So, and this other business, the request to release the grand jury transcript, that's a farce, because anyone that knows the law knows the judge is not going to be allowed to release that. So it is weak. It's like, let's make it look like we're attempting to be transparent, knowing that our request is definitely going to be denied, which actually just, to me, makes everything look even worse. So it's a it's a terrible game I think the government is playing right now.
I was
Yeah.
surprised that in the North, in the New York version of that request, that the court's entertaining it. You know, they're asking for briefs. They're asking for a letter from Ghislaine Maxwell about some of the information she provided to the grand jury so they could somehow coalesce that. But I don't know if that's all just playing the game, because the ultimate answer is still going to be the same. It's,
Yeah.
you know, grand jury stuff is sacrosanct. You know,
And
that's,
here's by the way, here's a copy. You can see the federal in Florida. Here's a copy of the ruling that denied to unseal the grand jury, and plus the unseal the grand jury clearances. Plus, it wasn't everything. They were just on the unseal some things, but not everything. And that takes us again away. If we're going to be talking about her, and good, if she can get a deal, fine, terrific. Because quite frankly, if she can get a deal, absolutely. But the reason why Jeffrey Epstein, in my opinion, had to be killed is that he had information that some people didn't want out. Now, she may not even know what that information is, but since she's left, they're going to try to get her to say something, which may satisfy some people. But I think in doing so, this just widens, what should be the focus, which is one, on the victims, and two, on who killed Jeffrey Epstein. Because if you find out who killed Jeffrey Epstein, then you're going to know why this is so important to have this kind of maybe deal with Ghislaine Maxwell, in my opinion. That's all I say. Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is, if assuming, for the sake of this conversation, that Jeffrey was killed, and if this was a real homicide investigation underway, they would look for who would benefit by his death, who would have the ability to orchestrate getting him hit in a federal prison, and who would have the ability to have the DOJ cover this stuff up, and come out with a report with a lot of misinformation in there and lacking information. Like, you never hear in the DOJ report, it never states that the two pathologists said it looked more like a suicide than a homicide. It's completely glossed over and swept under the carpet. They just want to call it a suicide and move on. But the facts, like I said, don't add up.
Mark, you got to be encouraged. And I know you said people have reached out to you, but when we talked, what was it, 2 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, I never thought we'd still be having this conversation or anything like it 2 weeks after that big info dump and the big video. But people are up in arms on both sides of the aisle, even though we're not talking about this politically. That's a fact. And so that must encourage you, at least give you hope that we're going to get some answers.
Well, it is. I've been contacted by journalists literally all over the world now that want to hear about this and are questioning this. So it's not just a local issue anymore. This is international.